Okay, I just thought I'd do because it's such a shitty day, I thought I'd just do a shortish tutorial on making a few adjustments in Camera Raw. The same adjustments can be made in Lightroom, and depending on the software that came with your camera, you may or may not be able to do this, but I assume that there'll be some of these things that you can do in your camera software. So let's just open this image here. It's just a snapshot I took for the purposes of this demonstration. It's got multiple issues. This is well exposed, but of course we've blown out the background. The horizon isn't straight. Yeah, so I mean you could throw this image away, but I thought, well, let's see if we can rescue something and turn it into something a little bit interesting and dramatic, and hopefully I'll have some success at that, though probably not for competition or anything. First thing I'm going to do is use the straighten tool. You may have various variations of these. This icon has changed in the last update we received, but yeah, straighten tool, you can tap the A key to get it. You can also do it by using the crop and then straightening within the crop by rotating the crop window. So I'm just going to grab this and set it to about there, and I'm going to drag it across to about, I think that's about right. You can see that by doing that, Camera Raw has already put in the crop box, making sure that there's nothing that's spilled over outside of the image, and it has rotated the image accordingly. Now I could bring any of these down as well to change the cropping, but I'm not too bothered by that at the moment, so I'll just hit enter to accept that change, and there we are. Now I could try auto to start with. Actually, that's not a bad place to start. The auto button used to be pretty awful, but it's improved over the last few versions of Camera Raw, so I'm liking that. Not because this has gone into darkness, but because of what it's done in the background here, which is what I'm going to focus on at the moment. So I'm going to come back to contrast. At the moment I want to darken the highlights even more to bring more detail out of that sky, and I'm darkening the highlights by bringing the slider to the left. If I was to bring it to the right, it would lighten those highlights. I'm going to leave the shadows where they are for the time being, and I'm going to bring the whites back as well. So I'm getting a bit more of what I want out of the sky. Now I want to brighten up what's going on in here, so I'm going to use the shadows slider, and I'm going to slide that to the left to open those shadows up. You can see the image is going to get quite flat looking. Actually, I'm going to bring it all the way up to 100. So we've lost a lot of contrast here, and it's looking kind of flat, but we will deal with that later. I'm going to, let's see if I lighten the blacks. Well, I'm going to darken the blacks just a little bit, not too much, about there will do. I'm going to lift the clarity. That will also add some contrast, but in the midtones. Clarity affects contrast of the midtones. Contrast affects the black and white points and makes them more contrasty. Clarity is the midtones. So that's where you get, brings more detail in and gets kind of grungy looking sometimes. And that's what I want here, because it's a grungy old scarecrow in a grungy old raincoat. So I'll bring that up. I want to lift a bit of contrast as well here. So I'll just pop that a bit, and I'm going to lift the saturation up a bit, actually quite a bit, but I'm going to, yeah, I'm going to pull back the vibrance so that that raincoat doesn't get too bright. And that actually pulled back the green tones, of which there are most in there. It barely touched the reds in there. And if I click on this preview button, You can see that's where we've come already, just on this, just in what we've done so far. Another thing I want to do, and I should have done this first actually, I usually do it first. On my camera I've got the picture settings to faithful. I shoot in RAW. I don't need it to pop any greens and blues for landscapes or the reds for portraits or anything like that. I just want it to be neutral or faithful. So I'm going to go with faithful here, because that's what it was in the camera. You can see it did make a change. It darkened everything down, which I'm quite happy about, because I'm going to lift this up again later. And I'll also change for the lens correction. The lens I used does a bit of vignetting, and there's always a little bit of lens distortion. So I'm just going to tick that to enable the lens profile correction. It's picked up that I shot using my 70-200, that it was a Canon, that it's got a profile, all that kind of stuff, and it made adjustments accordingly. I don't always use enable lens profiles. Sometimes I don't like what it does, sometimes I do. It just depends on the image. I'm going to come back into this. I do jump about a little bit here. I don't find that just to go from the first tab systematically through them is all that helpful, so I do jump around a little bit. So if I come back to the first one again, you can see what I've done. I'm just going to open, I can't open the shadows anymore. I may just lift the exposure slightly. So you can, because we're making non-destructive changes, we can come and tweak these to our heart's content as we move through the tabs and the changes that are made become too much or not enough, or whatever the case may be. So I'm going to come back into the curves here, and I'm going to darken the highlights again through this curves. So it's getting kind of muddy looking, but that's okay. I might just lighten the lights slightly. And everything I do, it's just, you know, based on what I'm seeing. I lighten the darks, but then bring the shadows. Actually, maybe I'll lift the shadows and just pull the darks back a bit. The lights and darks refer to the midtones that would be affected by clarity, for example. The highlights and shadows speak for themselves. It's the brightest and darkest values in your image. I'm going to come into a bit of toning. I want the red in here to be a little more saturated, and I want to, not that there's a lot of colour in here, but I actually want to desaturate what colour there is in there. So I can do this by grabbing the reds, that's the hue. So if I come across to this saturation tab in here, and I can pull, I want to push the reds up a bit, and if I go too far you can see that I hope you can see that it's affected the wood here and here, but it has gone a bit too far, and we've got some colour clipping in here in parts of the image, so I'll just pull it back a little bit so we don't get that. Might saturate the oranges a bit more, that's part of those reds again, but not so much that we end up with blocks of orange. We still want, you know, gradual tonal changes. I might lift the yellows a little bit, and I'm going to pull the blues. I'm going to desaturate the blues, and if you look you can see the background which had the blues. If I bring that up to more saturation, that's where any blues were in the image, so I'm just going to desaturate that a bit. But I am going to pop a bit more colour back in there by coming into, I'll do that later actually, we'll go into the luminance, and we can darken or lighten different tonal values in here. So if I come in with the reds, and if I darken the reds, you can see, I hope you can see on the screen, the red tones darken. If I lighten them, you can see they get a bit brighter. So there's not a huge difference because there's not a lot of reds in there, but it can be a way of creating more contrast in an image as well, while just focusing on specific colour values. I'm going to brighten the oranges a bit. And as usual, you just tweak colours as you like them. I'm going to brighten those yellows quite a bit and darken the greens. There's not a lot of green in there, but I'll darken the greens. Let's just see. If you pull them across, you can see what colours by what change there is. So I want to darken those aquas quite a bit. I want to darken those blues quite a bit. Even though I've pulled the saturation back, it still picks up that those colour values exist in the image, in the raw file. So we want to darken those right up. Let's see if there's any purples. Oh, there's a bit of purple. So we're going to darken those as well. Any magentas? The magenta is mostly around the chromatic aberration. I'm going to darken that right down. I don't know if you saw it. If I come right in here a bit, let me brighten that again. So you can see there's a chromatic aberration and it has some fringing. Let's come into 100%. I'll just hold down the space bar to get my hand tool to move. So you can see that the greens, there's some green here from chromatic aberration, there's a little bit of blue up here with chromatic aberration, and there's the magenta down here, which is all chromatic aberration. I'm going to darken that down because that will help fade it a bit. Have we got a result yet? Let's see. Oh, actually, no, I might leave that brighter. This is quite a... It's always good to come in at 100% because you can see what's going on. So I've darkened the aquas, which has had an effect on that aberration there. I've darkened the greens, which has had an effect on the aberration there. I don't know if you can see what's going on. I'm quite happy with what it's done to the image overall, but we have got this artifacts in these areas where the lens has created this fringing. So I'm going to go back to the lens correction tool. I'm going to go into colour and I'm going to click this remove chromatic aberration button, and that will have some effect, and it's done quite a nice job already. And I'm just going to reduce even further the purple, and the green is not too bad. Green gets a bit yellow if I'll leave that where that is. Let's bring that all the way up there and see what happens. I mean, each image is different in the way chromatic aberration affects it, and it's dependent on the light and the colours around it and all sorts of things like that. So if I preview, click the preview button there, you can see we've gone from this edging here, click that button back on again, and we've essentially removed that without bringing in too much artifacting. And I may give this a vignette as well, so I'll just come down to fit in view, and I'm going to give it quite a heavy vignette because I want it sort of all dark and stormy. And it's just affected, I don't know if you saw that, but it just affected around the outside here, but I want it to affect more, I want it to come in more. So I'm going to change the midpoint by sliding it to the left. Excuse me. And that just brings that vignette in a bit more. And I think I'll also do a little bit of split toning in the highlights and the shadows. So I'm going to lift the saturation a bit there, there, and that's not what I want at all. So I want the highlights to have sort of a creamy yellow in them, so I'm bringing that into there. And I want the shadows to be more blue, sort of coldish looking shadows, so bring that into there. That's looking pretty good. I want now this balance means, do you weight it more towards the shadows or the highlights? I am going to weight it more towards the highlights, I think. So it's more the creamy yellow than the cool blue. And if you've got too much saturation on either one, you can just pull it back with the saturation slider. So, and now I just want to sharpen the image. Have we done that yet? Nope, we haven't done that yet. These are the default settings. I'll sharpen it quite heavy so that you can see what's happening. So I'm just going to slide these all the way up, almost all the way up. And what you do in sharpening, again, will depend on the image and the effect that you want. Now with the sharpening, it's affected the sky and the water as well as the scarecrow itself. I don't want that, so I'm going to mask away some of what I've done. So if I hold down the Alt key, or the Option key if you've got a Mac, and I click on that slider there, it's white because white reveals and black conceals, and white is, it's showing that the whole image is being sharpened. As I slide this masking slider over, you can see it's getting black areas, and those black areas are protected from the sharpening I've done. So I'm just sharpening a relatively small amount, just doing a bit of edge sharpening really, and the sky will not be affected at all. I don't know if you can see on the screen the difference. Probably not. Let's bring that up so that you can see a difference. And normally you'd do some sharpening at 100% so that you can really see what's going on and you're not over sharpening an image. So there's a little bit of sharpening popped into here. I can change the mask if I want more to come in and be sharpened, and just preview that. I don't know if you can see the change, but it's quite a large amount of sharpening without affecting this sky or much of the water, just the edges in the water. So that's probably about it. Hope you've learned something. Hope you have fun with your own images. We'll just click done, or you can open the image to open it in Photoshop and edit further, or you can click done and it will just go back to Bridge or wherever, and with these changes intact. If you want to see the before and after, hold down the Alt key or the Option key. You'll see that the cancel button becomes reset. Just click on reset. That goes back to the image we started with. I'll just Control Z to undo that reset, and that's where we are now. So hope this has been helpful. What else to do on a wet Sunday? Cheers. Bye.